Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining the Nonprofit Learning Lab for today's workshop. If you have any questions along the way for our presenter, you can type them into the question box in your go-to control panel, likely on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any tech-related questions, you can also type them there. If you're interested in using live captions for today's workshop, you can use the link that we'll send in the chat shortly. And if you're interested in receiving the recordings and materials from today's free webinar, you can visit our free webinars page on the Nonprofit Learning Lab website, or you can send us an email at program@nonprofitlearninglab.org. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Austin.
Perfect. Well, welcome everybody. And today what we're going to cover is how do you know if your nonprofit's website is working, if it's effective, and then what you can do if you determine that it's not. So this webinar is for you if you've experienced any of the following. You feel like your nonprofit's website is just sort of there. So it works, it's functional, you might poke it with a stick from time to time, but you wouldn't really say that you feel confident about its role within the larger context of your work. Number two, you find yourself actively working around your website rather than alongside it. I can't tell you the number of organizations that I've met who say that they actively try to not steer people to their website at all because they know that more likely than not, it's just going to confuse that person. Number three, you may also find yourself tearing your hair out when it comes time to make changes on the website. The most common complaint I hear from nonprofit communication professionals is that the website never really quite works like you'd hope, with a lot of frustration when it comes time to do something simple like update some text or swap out some photos. And then finally, number four, you are frankly annoyed because your website isn't doing any of the heavy lifting. So, you're busy, you wear too many hats as it is, and the last thing you want to do is become a web developer just so that you can keep things up to date on the site. And so if you identify with any of these situations, which I've heard from dozens, if not hundreds of nonprofit staff members, then you are in the right place. And my promise to you is that you will come away from today with a better understanding for how to know if your nonprofit's website is effective or not, and then what to do if it isn't. So real quick about me, my name is Austin Haddix, and I run a web agency called Pixel Lighthouse. And at Pixel Lighthouse, we help nonprofits spark that aha moment behind their mission and grow their community. And so we're a husband-wife team with a handful of contractors. My wife is our creative director, so her name is Andrea. And what we do is we help nonprofits build websites. But we don't build websites that are just there. We create websites that actually tell your story, connect with your community, and get visitors taking action. And so at this point, we've spoken with literally over 200 nonprofits regarding their websites. And through those conversations, we've identified several common patterns for where things go wrong with your online presence. And so we're going to be covering many of those considerations today. And so I think that when we're talking about what makes a website effective, we have to start with the question, well, what do we mean by effective? Like, what does that even mean, especially in the context of websites? And the answer lies in that sentence that I just said a minute ago. Your website should tell a story about your mission in your community. It should build relationships with visitors, and it should encourage people to do something meaningful when they check you out online. And so that is the goal of your organization's website. And if you think about it, your nonprofit's website is really that central hub where your community goes to find out more information. So it's where you present your work, you provide access to resources, and it's where all these different groups that make up your community, from your program participants, your donors, your volunteers, your partners, and many others, it's where they can all go to deepen their connection with your organization. So no matter if they've interacted with you 1,000 times or it's their first time, your website should lay out the path forward for people so that they can move from passive visitors to active participants in your mission. So that is our definition of effectiveness. It's a website that does what we want it to do. So it should tell your story, build relationships, and get people taking meaningful action. So to start things off, I want to have a quick poll where I want you to rate your own organization's website on a scale of 1 to 5 for how well that you feel it draws people closer to your mission. And so for your nonprofit's website, give me a rating from 1 to 5, 1 being that our website is a spectacular and confusing experience for everybody, and then 5 being that most people who are interested in our mission will take action on the site. And so while you're submitting your response, I will say that the load that your nonprofit's website has to carry is pretty large, not least of which because there's so many different groups that you're trying to reach. They often have conflicting needs and expectations. But then you couple that with the fact that many nonprofits have missions that you can't easily sum up in a simple phrase. Things start to get pretty complicated pretty fast. And so I think that's why everything's kind of a little bit tricky when you're trying to determine website effectiveness. And so looks like we've got our answers. So we've got none in 1, we've got 10% in 2, 56% in 3, 25% in 4, and then 0 in 5. So this very beautiful bell curve, actually. And so with most of them in 3, I'm interpreting that to mean that there is a decent balance in terms of definitely needing room for improvement, but also a functional foundation in place. And so that works well because we're going to cover how you can take that number and improve it so that you can feel more confident about your organization's website. And so when we're considering our website's effectiveness, we need to start by making sure that we've covered all the basics. And so, this core stuff is required if you want to have an effective website. So the first concern is your personal opinion of your organization's website. So do you yourself feel like it's a helpful resource? Because if it doesn't feel helpful to you as an insider to your work, it's highly unlikely that an outsider is going to be able to benefit from it. The second is if the website is easy to update from a content management perspective. So is it something that you or a team member can easily make everyday changes to, like updating text or adding a page or swapping out images? And that part's necessary because your website can very quickly become out of date if you can't make those adjustments. And it can also become pretty expensive if you always have to go through an external vendor to make changes. Third is your brand. And when I say brand, I don't just mean your logo and your colors, but it's really the website as a whole. So does the website send the right vibe to visitors? The brand is sort of like the feeling that visitors get when they take everything in, and you want that to feel like a cohesive experience. Fourth is your mobile. So is your organization's website something that's easy for people to use on phones and other mobile devices? The majority of internet traffic now happens on phones and tablets, and you need to take that into account because at least half of all your visitors are probably viewing your site there. Fifth is having a security certificate. So does your website have that padlock or the HTTPS in front of the URL? Having a security certificate is a standard expectation for all websites now, and it's something that visitors absolutely pick up on. Sixth is your analytics. So do you have some sort of analytics software installed on the website? And this is often Google Analytics because it's free, but there are other options as well. And seventh is the site speed. So is your website relatively quick to load? Less than 1 second is amazing, 2 seconds is quite good, and then anything above 3 seconds is probably worth addressing. So every nonprofit website should have these elements in place. But I do also want to stress that it's more than just a list of best practices. So each one of these items brings benefits with it when it's in place. So first, having a favorable opinion of your website gives you the confidence to market your organization. So it provides you the reassurance that you always have your website in the background, in your corner, supporting your efforts to bring people closer to your mission. When your website's easy to manage, it makes your team flexible. So you're able to adapt to new situations quickly. You can fix problems, really get in there, and just remain more nimble as an organization. Having a strong brand builds trust with your community. So it sends signals to visitors that you are a reliable organization that they can look toward for making lasting change. Optimizing for mobile devices improves your website engagement. So it makes it easier for people to interact with you when they're on the go. Fifth, having that security certificate keeps things secure, obviously, but it also assures visitors that their information is safe and that they can interact with you online without worry. Sixth, having analytics provides you with feedback on how well your website's doing. And we're going to discuss this point more here in just a second. And then finally, having a fast website means that your content doesn't feel like a chore for visitors to use. So it's responsive, it's light, it's streamlined, and it doesn't get in the way of somebody who wants to explore 3, 4, 5 or more pages of your website. So these are the main considerations that every nonprofit website should have in place. And if you're looking for a good starting point, then absolutely begin here. But let's assume that you already have those things in place. So that's when it makes sense to start looking at some of the data on how visitors engage with you online. And you'll have to have some analytics software such as Google Analytics installed on your website to know this. In your analytics data, so it's really key for understanding your website effectiveness. So you might already have some information such as how many people are filling out your application form per week, or how many donations that you receive in a given month. And those data points are essential, but they're really just the outcome. So it's the goal that we're working toward, but it doesn't really shed any light on what happened before somebody got there. And so if there's a problem from when someone first loads your website to them taking action, we want to know so we can address it. And so the way that we uncover that is by looking at your analytics data. The thing with analytics is that it is way too much information for most people to handle, myself very much included. We don't want to drown in the data and sign ourselves up for a bunch of pain. So what I found is that by taking a targeted look at just 3 or 4 data points, you can still keep things comprehensible while still allowing you to monitor and understand how things are actually performing. So for determining if your website is effective, I like to look at 3 data points, which are bounce rate, your average time on page, also known as the average engagement rate, and your actions. And so these 3 data points are all you need to have a window into how well your website is connecting with your visitors. So the first metric is the bounce rate. And so you may be asking yourself, what is the bounce rate? Well, if you take the situation where a visitor arrives at your website, say they briefly scan your content, and then they leave without engaging or visiting any other pages. So that would be called a bounce. So the bounce rate is the percentage of single page visits representing the number of visitors who exit your site after viewing just one page. So if we turn that into English, if you have a bounce rate on your homepage of 70%, that means that 70% of the people who come to your homepage, they leave without clicking through to explore more. And this is the first metric to consider because a high bounce rate suggests that your website isn't holding the interest of your community. And if you improve your bounce rate, you get visitors to stick around long enough so that they can learn more and take action. And so if we have a high bounce rate, meaning that lots of people are bouncing off the website, what should we do? Well, to improve your bounce rate, you can focus on a couple of key levers. Number 1 is scannability. So the truth is that most people scan websites rather than reading it all the way through. And you can optimize your content for scanning by using icons and clear headlines, bullet points, and short paragraphs that actually break things up and just make it easier for readers to quickly find the information they're looking for. Number 2 is to make sure that you're using relevant images. So always make sure that you're including high quality relevant images that actually connect with your mission. Having that visual element draws people in, and it makes them want to read the content that sits alongside such great imagery. Number 3 is your messaging. So, the fact is that lots of messaging on nonprofit websites can feel a little dense at times. It can sometimes be confusing or just otherwise difficult for readers to visit through. And so when people feel confused, that's when they decide to leave your website. So ensure your website uses straightforward messaging that always feels clear. And then finally, number 4 is the overall design. So a cohesive design can really make or break that first impression. And you want to make sure that your nonprofit's website design, it needs to do a lot. It needs to do more than just look pretty. Your brand and design should really reflect your organization's values. They should support your story, and they should really elevate your messaging to make it even more impactful. And so by focusing on these areas, you can significantly improve your bounce rate if it does need improvement. The second consideration when it comes to nonprofit website effectiveness is the average time on page or average time of engagement. And so the time on page represents the average amount of time that visitors spend on a specific page before they decide to navigate somewhere else. And so a higher average time on page generally indicates that your website's content is engaging, it's informative, and it feels relevant. And it suggests that visitors are actually taking the time to read and absorb the information that you're presenting. And so if on the other side, if you have a low average time on page, that signals that your content isn't actually capturing your reader's interest. So you can improve your average time on page by focusing on these points. Number 1 is to make sure you have community-focused messaging. So you want to keep things very you-centered. So it's not so much that we at such and such nonprofit are changing the world, but it's more along the lines of, with support from people like you, we are able to create more impact. So it's always important to remember that good messaging pulls people in, and it makes them feel like they're a part of your story. Number 2 is the length, where there's definitely a Goldilocks principle in play. You want it to be not too long, but also not too short. You want to give visitors enough information so that they understand what you do, but you're also not writing the next great American novel. So, be aware of what level of detail is important and what detail is maybe a little bit too much in the weeds, especially on pages like your homepage or a resources page, where I think it's pretty easy to fall into that trap. Number 3 is your readability. So in short, you want to make your content easy to read. You can do that by writing at a 9th grade level, where you're keeping things very conversational, like you're speaking to a friend at a coffee shop. And another way to think about it is, your website isn't an academic paper or a grant application. You don't want your visitors to have to stretch to understand your messaging. And then another good thing to keep in mind, you want to make sure that you're always using a font size that's easy to read without magnification. And then the last point is number 4, and it's definitely a nice to have. It's certainly not a requirement, but having interactive content can improve the amount of time that someone stays on a given page. And so when we say interactive content, interactive elements, those would be things like infographics, could be videos, could be something like a quiz. So it's something that you may or may not already have, but if you do, and it's used strategically, it does often increase the amount of time that people spend on a given page. And so by concentrating on these 4 levers, you can improve your average time on page, meaning that you've created a more engaging experience for visitors. And then our last data point is the actions themselves. And so this is really the crux of the matter, which is, are people taking action when they come to the website? And we also want to specify meaningful action. So it's some kind of engagement that isn't just passive reading. Awareness is important, but there's always something that people can do, whether that be big or small, where they can get involved with your mission. So to encourage action taking on your organization's website, consider focusing on these 4 areas. Number 1 is to make it easy. So you want to simplify the process for taking action, whether that be signing up for a newsletter, donating, registering for an event, could be many things. So you want to streamline your forms. You want to minimize the number of required fields. And you want to make sure that you're always using clear instructions to guide people through that process. Number 2 is one that might sound a little silly, but it's overlooked pretty frequently. You want to make sure that things actually work. So you need to test all interactive elements, make sure your buttons are going to the right places, your forms are functioning, your links point to the right place, just to make sure that everything's functioning correctly across different devices and browsers. So always double check, especially if you're about to do a big push or expect to have a lot of people coming to the website. Number 3 is to make it obvious. So ensure your calls to action are visually prominent and easy to locate on the page. And you can do this by using contrasting colors, larger fonts, and just strategically placing them to make sure that you're always drawing attention to those areas. Then number 4 is to always have a next step. So regardless of where somebody is on the website, you want to always include a call to action that directs someone to take that next step. And so if you find yourself, your visitors needing that little extra push whenever they come to the website to get them to take action, you can focus on these 4 areas to get them off the ledge. So the next time that you're trying to evaluate, is our website working? You ask yourself, do we have the basic core pieces in place for our organization's website? So do you feel confident about the website? Can you manage its content? Does it have a memorable brand? Does it work well on mobile? Does it have a security certificate? Do we have analytics installed? And is it fast to load? And if it's not, then start there, address those first. Lacking those pieces will make any other improvements more difficult. But then if you want to dig deeper, you can look at things like your bounce rate, your average time on page, and the actions that people are taking. And then if there are any issues with those pieces of data, then that's when you can start to make a few tweaks, like what we described before, to address those issues and make your website a little bit more effective. So that is how to determine if your nonprofit's website is effective and how to fix it. One note I did want to mention that I have been brought here in connection with the Association of Consultants to Nonprofits. It's an incredible group of consultants offering tons of resources for nonprofits. So if you check out either of the URLs on my screen right now, you can submit an RFP if you're seeking proposals for any of your projects, or you can just browse consultants to see who's out there. So definitely check out these links if you ever need some extra external support for your organization. ACN is a really great group of people and they can absolutely help. And I also wanted to throw out where everybody can find me online. So the first way is that you can add me on LinkedIn, where each week I share 3 actionable pieces of content just like this on how to improve your nonprofit's website and brand. So if you'd like more tips on nonprofit website best practices, then definitely add me there. And if you're looking for another quick boost, I've also put together a guide for the top nonprofit website mistakes. So it's a free resource, and you can access that resource by going to pixellighthouse.com/nonprofit-website-mistakes. And so that is the presentation for today. So I'd love to open the floor to any questions if anybody has any.
Hi, whoa, sorry. Hi, Austin, thank you. We do have one question, and it is, I think that we have too many branding and click-throughs on each of our pages on our websites. It feels like the actual page content gets lost. How can we narrow down these things?
So by branding and click-throughs, I would interpret that as maybe there's like a lot of busyness on the page. So maybe there's a lot of graphics or just kind of branding flourishes throughout. And so I would say that there is definitely a balance to be struck where you want there to be the visual element, like just words on a page isn't enough. You don't want your website to just be like a Google Doc. So the more that you can start to remove any of those elements that might be more distracting, especially whenever there are pieces that you feel are really taking away from the larger message that you're trying to say. Like, I think good design and good branding elements really work kind of like in between the words on the page, if that makes sense. So your icons and your patterns and just the different visual elements should kind of work alongside the page to draw the eye. But you definitely don't want to have too many, because then it starts to become a little bit competitive and nobody knows where their eye is supposed to go, and then it feels a little bit overwhelming and nobody has the right impression. So striking that balance and starting to peel those pieces away that you feel are not really additive, I think is a really good start.
Thank you. Can you go back to the to your URL? Someone asked if they could get that again.
Totally.
And then while they can look at that, we have another question. Taking what you have shared and applying it to our website, what elements do you recommend we start updating first?
That is a great question. I think if you only address one piece of your website, I think the thing that most consistently, the most confusing part of the experience for a lot of organizations is the very top of the homepage. And so the homepage, ideally at the very top, that's kind of like your most important real estate, because for most of your visitors, that's going to be the first thing that they see. It's going to be their first interaction with you on your website. And if you can get it right, then that opens the door for a lot more engagement. And so with that piece, make sure that it is like a solid first impression. You want to make sure that you're answering the questions that people have on their mind, which are, like, what are you all about as an organization? What's the big idea here? And keep, your messaging pretty light. So you don't want to be you want it to be like high level enough that somebody can read in 10 to 15 words. This is our big idea. This is what we're all about. And then that's kind of like the invitation where somebody can see that, they can immediately know, okay, this is where this organization operates. This nonprofit kind of fits in this place in my head. And then I know immediately, does this sound interesting? I'm going to, keep scrolling and move down, or, maybe this isn't something that I'm interested in. So I know to hit the back button, and you're just making it easier for people to know, what website they're about to step into.
Awesome. And we have another question. For nonprofits with a WordPress website without a trained website administrator, what is the easiest analytics to implement? Google Analytics is super confusing.
My heart goes out to you. I agree in a lot of ways. Google Analytics, so it is ubiquitous, and it's going to be the easiest to implement in terms of, especially with WordPress, there's at least a dozen plugins that will set it up for you. There are several other analytics solutions that are out there that are simpler, where their competitive advantage is that it's not Google Analytics, so it just gives you kind of the bare bones data that you need to know. And so some of those, I think Phantom is one, and there's another one that the name escapes me right now, but those are also options. But the drawback with those is that the plugin support isn't going to be as great, and it may require a little bit of technical intervention, or at a minimum, you'd have to watch a couple YouTube videos to see and kind of get familiar enough with the process. So unfortunately, Google Analytics, it is confusing, and that's why I try to stick to just those 3 data points. But there are some other options if you're trying to avoid Google Analytics that are still just as good. It's just getting them set up and implemented is a bit of a hurdle at the beginning.
Great, thank you. That's all the questions that we have today. Thank you, Austin. If you all are interested in receiving the recordings and materials from today's free webinar, you can visit our free webinars page on the Nonprofit Learning Lab website, or you can send us an email at program@nonprofitlearninglab.org. Thank you all so much for participating. And again, thank you, Austin, for educating our community.
Yeah, thanks everybody.